There we go. Oh, interesting. All right. It'll just be one sec.
Cool.
All right, we are live here on Meet the Makers. I'm Nick Mataragas, the artistic director of the Elgin Fringe Festival. Thank you for joining us this morning, or later on, if if you aren't watching it live, because this does get recorded, so that's a nice thing. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we have with us Krish Mohan, who is a stand-up comedian, and he is the creator of his show, The Citizen Revolution, which is part of the festival this year. Krish, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be a part of it. I've heard
Yeah,
very good things about the Elgin Fringe. This was highly recommended for me to apply to by Madeline O'Malley. So shout out to Madeline.
yeah, Madeline, who is one of our regulars, she was not with. She did our spring fringe this year, but she did not do the main festival this
Oh
year.
yeah.
But hopefully we'll have her back again next year when we're hopefully back in person. At least that's the goal, you know.
Right.
So if you're watching and you have questions for Krish, please add any questions you want, as long as they don't have any spoilers to the show. So if you've already seen his show, that's awesome. Thank you for watching it. But also keep in mind, not everyone who's watching the interview may have seen it already, and so don't like ruin anything. But please feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, no spoilers.
So I kind of want to get right into it. Your show, I watched it. Obviously, it'd be kind of weird for me to interview without watching it, but it's a really interesting look at like the American journey. You know, we start off, you talking about your journey through getting citizenship as a U.S. citizen, and then you go into kind of a little bit more about the American identity, which is really cool. So how recently did you get your citizenship?
December of last year. So it was,
Okay.
I think, December 18th is the official date that I got my citizenship. So, and I'm the only one in my family. My sister got it, and my mom got it in, I think, the summer of 2018.
Okay.
So a year before I did, and I don't think they got like a letter or anything from the president. Like, you're supposed to get some kind of a letter or something from the sitting president, but I don't think they had anything transferred over to Trump. But like by the time I did it, they did have this letter. Like, they had this stock letter, and they made like this weird little video with him, which was clearly like a lot of people that were like, just stick to the script for the love of God, just stick to the script kind of. It was really entertaining to watch. But I do have a signed letter from Trump that says, "Welcome to America," even though you have to be here for a while before you get your citizenship.
Well, that's true. And just just so people know, I'm natural born, but I'm first generation. So my father came over, so I know secondhand basically that the citizenship journey can be quite interesting.
Oh
How
yeah.
long have you been here? Like, it seems like you've been in the United States for a long time. But how long did it take you from getting here to becoming a citizen? Then?
It I've been here for 23 years, and you could have, when I first came here, like, it was the end of the Clinton administration and everything, and immigration wasn't really like a topic to address. That really became something bigger after 9/11. So after 9/11, they changed some of the rules, because my understanding was, if you had been here under some kind of visa or whatever, um, you could just take the test, right? Like, you didn't have to get a green card, and then wait 5 years after 5 years of permanent residency. Like, you just had to be here with the job, and like make sure that you pay your taxes if you were eligible to pay your taxes, and then you get to take the test. Like, and then it's like I think it's like $1,200 or something like that to go through the whole testing process. But after 9/11 happened, they basically changed it to, you have to become a permanent resident first, and then 5 years after that, you can get your citizenship to like add an extra measure of security, which they kind of like to put everything under the guise of safety, but it's really just a bunch of fear mongering bullshit. Um, I'm being a little bit more blunt than
That's okay.
but
That's okay.
but that's kind of what they wrapped it around. So, I mean, I could have taken the citizenship test, or rather, my parents could have taken the citizenship test when I was like 13 or 14. And I think so at that point, my sister would have been like 17. So if they would have taken the test and passed it, I think we would have like, because we were their kids and because we were under 18, we might have been grandfathered in, or we might have had to go through like an abridged process or something like that. But because everything kind of went to hell, and they started changing all these rules, we had to wait till we got our green card, which that didn't happen till after my freshman year of college. And because like we went through, they lost our paperwork, we had to restart the process. My dad lost his job, so we had to restart the process again because it was all connected to employment. So we went through this whole big process, and then after that, like the older I got and the more kind of jaded I got about the electoral process, and the right to vote being like the main thing that I would be granted. Uh I the the less I wanted to do it, honestly, like in my 20s, I kind of was just like, I don't really care about this thing that much. And really, like, my mom and my sister got it because, again, the Trump administration, they were very vocal about being anti-immigrant. So my parents got a little concerned, or at least my mom got a little concerned, and my sister got a little concerned. So eventually, like, I started going through the process as well. Um, Even though I was just like, it doesn't matter where I'm from. I'm like, we should judge me based on my, who I am as a person, and not what invisible lines I decided to cross. But at the end of the day, it does make things slightly easier. Um, but now we're like, we're switching from like judging people based on the color of their skin, which is still happening. That's not gone away or anything, but now we've like added an extra layer of, let's judge people based on their beliefs, and then let's judge people based on who they vote. And it's just like, can we remove one layer before we add another one?
I totally see that, because it is like, and it is like not just a judgment of like like the individual, but like of their, not just like who they are as a person, but also their Americanism.
Yeah.
Like there are definitely like some people judge like how much of an American you are based on certain things, and so I totally see that. That is a great point. And like I love the fact that you embrace this virtual environment, in the fact that you brought in visuals and you brought in, like the questions they ask you as you're applying for citizenship, and then also questions from the test, which I don't want to give away that kind of stuff, but like you talked about the idea of security and like these questions, and I'm like, and, anybody could answer however they want.
Yeah, I kind of felt like it was really silly to ask these very like direct questions. And I mean, fortunately, the application isn't full of them. A lot of the
Mm.
questions are just like standard questions that you would get asked in any sort of like application. But there are a series of questions that are just like, this is not how you don't conduct law enforcement this way. Right, like, or like counterterrorism. If we could fill out a form and like get rid of counterterrorism, I feel like we would be fine. Like
Right.
everything would be solved by now, right? Like, we would have just sent a bunch of forms over to the Middle East. We would have sent a bunch of forms to like any of the domestic terror threats we've had over the last 10 years, and then it would have just been like, well, we got them. Like, it would have been. But it was just so over the top. Um, and I kind of like, I was writing some of this stuff before the pandemic happened, and I was literally like gonna read on stage what the questions were.
Mhm.
But I think with this virtual realm, I really wanted to like try to show people, there's that whole notion of show don't tell, right? And in stand up on stage, The show don't tell rule, like you can show people through your words. That's a form, and now you can, the way you deliver it can kind of give you an opportunity to make certain things funny. Something that's already absurd, you can make it even more absurd because of the way that you read something. But I didn't have to do that because I can literally just show you like this is a real thing. And I think in certain respect, like when you do comedy that involves history and information and sociology and philosophy and politics and everything, kind of having that visual representation of like this is where this information is coming from, whether it be an article or a video clip or something, I think kind of adds to the just sort of the gravity of where the comedy is coming from. Especially when we're living in an era like that was kind of something that was really important to me is in regular stand up it's really hard for me to like cite my sources. There when you're on stage as a performer, I think there's a given trust from the audience that what you're saying on stage is real, is the truth. And that kind of, but I never want to I never want to take an audience the wrong way. So I have been wrong before. Like I've had people tell me like either a statistic or just like, hey, we overturned this thing on this date, and it's like, oh cool, like thank you for letting me know. Now I can change the show a little bit so that it makes a little bit more sense. But I never want to. And now I think with this virtual stuff, like doing a show on Zoom itself gives me the opportunity to be like, I'm not making this shit up.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't have to. It's just so it's right here. Like I can't. It's already crazy. Like how much crazier do you want me to make?
right. Yeah, that's a great point because yeah, stand up, it's not like anybody's looking for like a bibliography at the end of a stand up set, they just take your word for it. And that also like especially like we're talking about current events and stuff and how people discount things that are supposedly facts or are facts or whatever. And being able to have that physical proof, I think definitely adds to it for sure. And you kind of talk about a little bit about being on Zoom, and one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because stand up is a very, you're up on stage by yourself and you're kind of on your own. And sometimes with stand up, you get hecklers, which every stand up comedian handles hecklers differently. But with Zoom, you have people in the Zoom meeting and you have them saying things and reacting, and sometimes even in your show, throwing in their own attempts at jokes.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and so how is that? How do you react to that differently in that virtual setting versus a live in person setting?
Uh I think it's easier to make people a part of the show in a live setting where with the Zoom, like I will try to comment on it or I'll try to piggyback off of it and then I'll have to quickly move on so that we don't and I've had one or two shows where and it's like people that I've at this point it's like we know each other because they come to every show. Like I do these shows pretty much every single Friday and I'm writing a new show every week. So I kind of know them, and when I can pick out like, oh, that's so and so, there have been one or two times where it's gone on a little too long, and I have to be very direct about like, okay, we're done with this like this was fun for a minute, now it's like 3 minutes in, we're done with this riff. I got 12 more pages to cover of my script, so like let's just move forward from here. Where I in a live setting, like if something carries on more than a minute or two and I'm having a problem kind of shutting down a heckler, because I don't like to be mean. I'm not like I think the audience that comes to see me, like if I get mean, they kind of know something's wrong, right? Like this person is exceptionally annoying, and it's not just them that are annoyed. Now Krish is annoyed, but Krish, we've never seen Krish get super mean about anything, but that's whenever the crowd will step in and be like, hey, you gotta shut up, like stop, or you're in a venue, so like the venue owner will come up and be like, hey, if you're gonna talk, you got to go outside, and we're not refunding your tickets because you're disrupting the show, very much on your own merit and on your own accord. So I have to be the performer and sort of the audience police kind of person. Like, so it becomes a little challenging, but I think once you kind of get to know the audience a little bit more, and they do become repeat customers, and they keep coming back and they watch your show and they participate in the discussions afterwards and things of that sort. Like, it does make it a little bit easier to be like, hey, we're done with this. Like, how your friends will riff with you a little too long, and you're just
Yeah.
like, all right, that we've killed that joke. Like, we murdered that joke. Like, that joke is never coming back to life again.
Unfortunately, I am that friend in my group of friends, so I totally get that. It's almost like that's an interesting point because it's almost like you're creating a group of like Ed McMahon's versus like that drunk guy in the second row screaming stuff, you know. So it's an interesting way to format it there, and that's really cool. Kind of building off of that and the differences between having, being in a room versus on Zoom. Like, do you feel like how do you handle that difference in energy? Because I'm sure there's a difference in having people in the room with you reacting versus people online watching you.
Yeah, it's you kind of have to build it yourself when you're in this virtual world, um, where when I'm live, it's very easy to feed off the crowd. And, like, if it's kind of a subdued crowd, I can kind of poke at them and get, like, try to bring their energy back up. In a virtual setting, and with the format of the way that I'm writing the shows, because it is stand up, but it's written differently because I'm writing it for a virtual performance that gets recorded and then, will be put up on the internet for the rest of time. So it's also written for the internet, right? Like, it's not traditional stand up because it can't be, just based on the form of it and the platform we're using. So there are jokes and stuff in there, but if the jokes aren't landing, like, I don't have too many ways um of kind of roping the crowd back in, because this is the subject that we're on for the next hour, right? So, like, if you're not into a show about, like, Julian Assange, per se, like, if that's not your cup of tea, and you disagree with what I'm saying and you don't want to listen to it, or the jokes are too depressing or they're too dark or something, and that's just sort of the vibe of the show, it's gonna be a quiet hour. And I can kind of poke at them on a virtual level. Like, I can make little sideline references, which I do, and that's just sort of my own anxiety, that manifesting itself into jokes, like, which is just how I learned how to do comedy in the first place, is by manifesting my anxiety on stage into humor. And I can kind of do that, but even then, it's like, it's a lot harder to to win a crowd back over in a virtual setting, because you don't have this person directly in front of you, right? There is a little bit, there is that third wall of personal connection, that kind of is like, because an audience doesn't want you to fail. So when you see a live performance and you're like, oh man, I know this guy's trying real hard, I know this comic is doing their best, but boy, these jokes are just not landing. They're just not good, or they're not written well enough or something. But and I think a crowd can kind of still be encouraging to be like, okay, we can see where it's. But in a virtual setting, like, I don't think that can be communicated. So it just feels like dead silence. Um, like, I had a show a couple weeks ago where it was a lighter crowd, and either they weren't big laughers, period, or some of the jokes were too dark and some of the jokes weren't landing, and I kind of just had to be like, okay, got to buckle down and just go through the show and hope that some of these jokes hit and hope that nobody leaves. And nobody did leave, and everybody was very cool, but it was just like, this is kind of tough, and it's not It's not the best show that I've done.
Fair enough. We've all had shows where we're just like, oof, that was not good, or that was just something that did not work out well. And I think that's part of, not just stand up, but just being an entertainer in general, is being able to take that and go, that happened. Um,
Right.
but I love that you talk about there's kind of an empathy to a room, right? Like a group empathy that you don't necessarily get online for sure. Which I totally understand. I also like how you talked about, how you can go into different places with the virtual, because I think your show, the way it was formatted, it was very interesting, because you're very like joke heavy at the beginning, and then as you got into more like historical topics, I don't know if that was just something you felt or what, but like it seemed like you felt like you had the audience engaged now, and you could kind of spatter in the jokes a little bit less and just kind of focus more on the information and still make it humorous and still make it interesting. And I think so it kind of grew and evolved as the show went on, which I don't know if that was an intentional thing or if it's something you felt in the moment, but it was really a nice choice.
Oh, thank you. I don't know. I think it's become the way that I've gotten used to writing. Is as the show goes on, it becomes a little bit um there is a little bit more of a shift in balance between information and jokes. Where I like deriving jokes from information, like history in and of itself. There are some hilarious moments in history, like even when you look at something like the labor movement, is just the things that certain politicians have done, like certain governors and mayors of cities and even like presidents and stuff, like the way they've looked at literally just people that are coming out and being like, hey, we want human rights, and they're just like, great, military. Like that's such an absurd reaction. It's very difficult for me to not just say that and it not be funny. So like it sometimes it's just like the information is funny enough, and sometimes the information is dark, and I have to add a joke, right? I can add a metaphor or analogy or some or have an anecdote or something. But if I don't have that trust from the very beginning that I can take difficult topics and make them funny, um then it just kind of becomes a really depressing TED talk, that like that people are just like, I don't know why I'm here. And I never want that. I'm excited about the information. I'm excited about this stuff that I've learned and I've researched, and I'm passionate about these topics, so I want to convey that, and I think the best way to do that is through jokes. So I think the front part of the show always ends up being very joke heavy, and that is done kind of on purpose, because that's like when I was doing stand like when I came up in stand up, I had to write just jokes all the time. I couldn't involve any sort of serious topic because I didn't have the audience trust to know that I'm gonna take touchy subjects and not make them uncomfortable by addressing these things. So once I kind of learned how to write the jokes, then it became easier to talk about more controversial topics, and to bring in historical references and bring in politics and sociology, and then add the jokes where I felt like I needed them. I don't want it to be too informationally heavy, but I also don't want it to seem like I'm making fun of the history, or I'm making fun of the people that had to go through this stuff. Like the difficult part is like I'm trying to punch up. So the a friend of mine always says, like, there's always a victim to a joke. It just you make the choice of who the victim is. So the victim of my joke is a system that doesn't care about us. That's like, and the hypocrisy from that system that says I care about you, but then your actions do the exact opposite thing, right? Like it's like a parent that's like, I'm slapping you because I care about you, and it's like, do you think you can care about me differently though? Do you, like maybe with like a hug? Do you think that could also show caring? Like it's one of those things. So that's always the victim of my joke, and it does make the jokes a little bit harder to not come up with, but to deliver, to get out there, because it's not conventional. Even though comedy and pretty much all art forms have spoken truth to power, since like the dawn of art is sort of that's just what they've done. But it's not it's not seen as common ground anymore. That's not what art is seen as. Art is seen as a way to escape this stuff, to get away from the intricacies of life and everything. And let's it's fine, let's just talk about sandwiches, and let's make fun of the Subway sandwich person. And I have done that kind of comedy. It's just I was never fulfilled doing that kind of comedy. So yeah, so that whole journey, I guess it's a very long and roundabout way of saying, um trying to find the balance between talking about the history and talking about the information and finding where the jokes needed to be. So the setup might be 2 or 3 minutes for one really big joke, or it's a 6 minute historical anecdote with little jokes peppered in here and there that might not be big belly laughs, but they're enough of a laugh to go, oh, I get it. And then you kind of just, we move to the next thing, because the information and the jokes are equally as important. I think they kind of feed off of each other in order to get people to at least understand where we're coming from. Yeah.
I think that's really well put. Having a like background in comedy as well, it is interesting, that idea of talking about punching up, and the fact that comedy is supposed to be something that goes after the oppressors, not the oppressed. And
Right.
and that kind of also feeds into this idea of like a lot of people in comedy right now are like, woke culture is killing comedy. I'm like, you're missing the point of what comedy is if that's your argument,
Yeah.
and I think that's great. I also think it's very interesting because I think, and this, tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, but like, time also helps you to be able to do like heavier stuff. The fact that, a lot of stand-up comedians, their sets are going to be 5 to 15 minutes, where, you have a show which is an hour. So it lets you get into that longer stuff as well. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's honestly, that's where Fringe Festivals came in for me. Is I think I became far more of a long form comedian because I was doing Fringe Festivals. So I've been doing stand up for like 16 years now, something like that, 15 or 16 years, something along those lines. And, the first half of my career was doing all these short jokes. And when somebody asked me to do a 25-30 minute set, I would get incredibly nervous and I would not know how to, even in my early 20s, when I was a lot more comfortable on stage, I was a lot more comfortable on stage for a 15-minute set than I was a 25 or 30-minute set. Even though I knew I had the material, it's just a matter of like, well, how do I construct this material? And oh man, what happens if this joke fails? And, like there's a callback to it later, but it's like, do I remove it? But if I remove it, then I'm losing 5 minutes. So it was always like I used to get super nervous about it. And then once I kind of got into storytelling and learning how to tell a story, learning how to kind of, like I said, like take the information and mix it with the jokes, right? Like, what is the narrative arc of the story, and where are some of the jokes going to go where it doesn't completely deviate? Or if you are going to deviate, make the deviation part of the joke, right? So that's kind of like a lesson that you can learn there. And then it became like I was starting to talk about these bigger issues, and I was starting to do these fringe festivals where I could be on stage for 10 or 15 minutes and just explore the ins and outs of whatever idea I want, and and try to connect it to myself personally as an artist and as a person. And that gave me the freedom to just go into places that I never thought I could go. Like I don't think I would have written an entire comedy album about mental health and the societal views of mental health had I not learned how to like perform in a fringe festival, or writing an album about, the about just the identity politics and the way that we take these judgments and things of that sort, and and divide ourselves from them rather than saying, well, this is an interesting point of view and coming together. I don't think I would have been able to write an album or write with a thesis statement in mind had I not been doing Fringe Festivals. I think I started in like 2015 or something like that. So right at the cusp of when I was talking about ideas on stage and telling stories about my background as an immigrant, and things like that, where these are tougher topics to talk about. And now that we've gotten to this point where I'm so used to and so comfortable performing for an hour plus, when somebody's like, "Hey, I have a 15-minute spot for you," I'm like, "Well, what the hell am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? A setup?" Like, I was like, "All right, how do I abridge?" And that became a new challenge for me too. Is okay, this 15-minute chunk about gun control, if I just go up and do it, I'm gonna lose the room in 6 minutes or less, probably less. I'll lose the room in two. If I'm good, I will lose the room in two. Everybody will walk out by six, right? But if I set it up so that they know where I'm coming from, I can get rid of maybe two of these shorter little jokes in the midst of this argument and then do the gun routine and make that work and then maybe close on a silly little one liner or something along those lines. So it kind of became an interesting challenge for me where it's like, okay, I've written in this long form format where I do have the time and it's amazing. And I think it's pushed me creatively to talk about like tougher topics. But now how do I take that and kind of condense it into a 15-minute set? It became a little bit more of an interesting challenge, and I think even doing that kind of helped me become a better writer, because now it's like, okay, if I look at something like the history of the general strike of 1919 in Seattle, there's a lot of stuff that happened. There's a lot of details that I can go into, but which of these details are important? Which of these details are interesting? And where can I, what are the jokes that I'm getting to, and how does it fit the point that I want to make? And now I can kind of pick and choose the information that makes sense in the context of an argument, because I know how to abridge certain things. And some of the jokes is like, if I can do it in 15 minutes and still have the same amount of impact, maybe I don't need these other four jokes. Maybe this becomes one statement, and I kind of pack that down a little bit more. So yeah, it's very interesting how it's kind of weaved in and out. Like, doing long form comedy is awesome, and it does let you explore really big ideas in ways I don't think you can if you're trying to do like short jokes all the time. And I've seen comics do it. It's not to say that they can't, um, but you can, like, I think there is value in some of the short form stuff to find out how you can edit yourself, so that a piece that should be 8 minutes doesn't wind up being 23.
Totally makes sense. I totally get that, and that's such a cool thing, and that idea of, you know, your your evolution into a longer form, and then using that to grow into a different version of a short form, which is more rewarding, but still gets there. That's totally cool, and I love that, and that is such an amazing thing to think about. Like, that whole journey as an entertainer is something that it comes with that practice and that time of having that experience. Because and I'm sure, like, you've probably, in comedy there are definitely different kinds of people, and the people that are just like, if it's not funny, it's not worth it, versus, like, it's that idea of, is the joke more important or is the message more important, and where do you balance that off?
Yeah, that's definitely the challenge. Is I've had people ask me that, is it the message that's more important or the jokes that's more important? And again, I think they're equally important. I think the joke adds to the message, but the message amplifies the joke, so they kind of play
Hmm.
into each other. I think it should be a symbiotic relationship. I've always kind of looked at comedy as like, um, it's very Socratic. Like, it's an argument that you're trying to make, and I think humor is the vehicle to prove or disprove the argument. So I've literally had like I think because I give certain information with humor, with jokes and things of that sort, I've had conservatives like the stuff that I'm doing. I've had people that kind of on like these far right, like I had somebody that was like, I'm an anarcho-capitalist and I really liked your show, and I was like, I don't know what that means. um and we sat and talked about it, and I was like, on paper there is no reason you should like anything I said, but his point was, the arguments that I made were articulated well enough that it didn't make him feel alienated. So, and that's partly because he was able to drop his defenses and laugh about something. So even if it was a belief that he didn't particularly agree with, he could at least see the point of view, and laugh about it and find humor in it. And I think that's why it's like the message and the comedy have to go together. It can't be one or the other, because if it's too message oriented, then it's not comedy, and if it's too comedic, then what are you trying to say? I kind of lose sight of what's actually trying to be said. Like, are you trying to make a larger point? And you don't have to use comedy to make a larger point, right? And if that's the thing, then that's the thing, and that's fine. But don't try to sneak a little message in there or something. I've seen some comics do that over the years, and it bugs me, where I'm just like, all right, you just kind of threw in the phrase Black Lives Matter into this joke. Okay, I guess that's fine. Um, yes, I agree. I agree with you, but it just kind of seemed random. Like, like it didn't really fit what you were saying. And then you go on to make like a stereotypical black joke, which is also very confusing. Like, so you know what I mean? So if you kind of don't find like the balance between the message and the comedy, it can get very confusing. Like the narratives can get mixed up, and then you're just kind of saying stuff for the sake of saying stuff.
That totally get that, and I think that kind of leads into kind of the last thing I want to talk about, which is that the second chunk of your show, that where you talk about identity politics, and that idea of you know without giving away too much, like you talk about how the party of Lincoln isn't actually the party of Lincoln, and how the parties have changed and evolved over the years, but you do it without while still making it accommodating to people, because it's not something where you're like attacking individuals for believing something. It's just laying out the facts and showing the humor of how it's changed. And I think that's something that really worked well on this show.
Oh, thank you so much. I thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's hard to figure out. Like, I was kind of concerned about that, because like most of my audience is kind of lefty. But
Mhm.
I mean, if you look at the origins of the Republican Party, like they were very left. Like they were, like Abraham Lincoln was trying to figure out how to have a meeting with Marx at one point, which is like, well, like there's been no Democratic president that was ever like, oh, you're a weird socialist that has alienated himself with his friends and his family. Want to come over and hang out? Like, you know what I mean? Like, no one. And I like what Karl Marx has to say. And so that's why it was just like, well, what the hell happened to this party? How do they go from their main focal point being the abolition of slavery to essentially like attacking and destroying black communities all across the country, right? Like using the war on drugs, using this war on crime. Like, what happened? Where did this shift happen? And that's really what I wanted to explore, which again, so if you figure out what your argument is and how you're going to go about proving it, one, it makes it a lot easier to know what you're looking for in terms of research, and two, you can kind of figure out where you want to direct your jokes, because the jokes aren't I'm not directing the jokes at Abraham Lincoln, so why would I'm more directing the jokes at the people that are in the current Republican Party that keep saying that they're the party of Lincoln, as if that's supposed to give them a free pass for racism. you know, like, which it kind of feels like it is. So let's direct my jokes at that, but use the context of what Abraham Lincoln stood for as the vehicle to direct the jokes at that point. And like, what I mean, even the stuff that I was learning about, like the early Republican Party, like I'm pretty sure in 1872 there were more Black Republicans in Congress than there are now, right? Which is like, yay for the 1800s being more diverse than 2020. Like, you know, like that sort of juxtaposition is hilarious in and of itself. Is like, we look at a time where we didn't have technological advancements, where, you know, like these people were still fighting for their rights to vote, and more Black people were still in Congress than there are now within this party. So um that sort of stuff is very funny, and I don't want to alienate. Like, I'm not trying to say like, well, Republican voters are stupid. It's just more of like, if you want to be the party of Lincoln, here's how you can do it, but you're not, and here's what you're actually doing. And that sort of is, I think that's hilarious. It's finding like the historical juxtaposition, because what I mean, what you can't argue with history, right? Like Tucker Carlson can't come at me to be like, no, that's not. And it's like, but that's what it, like, we have documentation about that's exactly what it is. And sometimes what's interesting too is like, I will find conservative sources that will like confirm my, you know, lefty socialist liberal ideas. And it's like, that's, and at that point, if a conservative does watch a video or does watch my show, I don't like, they can't really say anything. It's just like, yeah, that's where it is. So it's, but again, it's like, how do I do it without being like, well, all Republicans are dumb? No, I don't think they're dumb. I think they're being hypocritical of what they claim they stand for. And if you're going to claim to be the party of Lincoln, then that's awesome. I hope that you are, but you know, that means that you have to start treating Black people better, right? Like, as a party. And you're probably going to have to, like, I don't know, stop giving corporations a bunch of money all the time. Or else you're
Yeah.
not really, you can't make the claim.
Yeah, for sure. And to be fair, you like, the main focus is on how the Republican Party has changed, but you definitely didn't, pull punches on the Democratic Party in its history as well. And I think that was a nice thing too, because there was a sense of balance to that.
Yeah, I'm affiliated with neither party. I've never claimed to be one or the other, and it's what I mean. This election, for whatever it becomes, it's just made the political environment in this country so much more divisive. And like, I have a lot of people that I'm very good friends with that have seen my comedy for years, that know that I don't affiliate myself with either of these parties, that because I don't say that I'm going to vote for one party over the other, like, I am the worst person in the world, right? Like, and I just got my right to vote, and it's like, I just want to vote for, I want to vote for somebody that represents my beliefs, that represents what, you know, what I want to see the country become, and what I think a lot of people want to see this country become, which is just better, and out of this neoliberal, neoconservative, pro-war, pro-corporate, you know, anti-worker stance that they've taken for the last 50 years. And that's both parties doing it. So if I'm gonna go after the Republicans, and then I find out that the Democrats are doing the same thing, I'm not gonna just sit on my hands about it. No, that now it becomes even funnier, because the people that are trying to be like, hey, look at these people being a bunch of jerks, and then you guys are tripping old ladies down the stairs, and it's just like, wait a minute, and it's like, yeah, but don't look over here though. Is like, that's also funny in and of itself. And adding that balance does mean, like, you can kind of be like, hey, you know how I pointed out that the Republican Party doesn't represent its people? Well, the Democrats aren't doing that either. So maybe the people that kind of feel disenfranchised by these two parties can start talking to each other, because we're all being left out. You know, so and I'm hoping that that's what it does. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but I think the internet can be amazing. I've had some really I've had some really wonderful people send me messages and comments and all that in emails about the shows and everything. But the internet can sometimes also be a cesspool of hate,
Mhm.
and so and I try not to focus on that too much, but it's hard when it just kind of keeps coming at you for it's like, well, you don't believe the same things I do, and it's like, yeah, I know, but you don't believe the same things I do, and I kind of like you as a person. And they're like, well, I hate you, and it's like, well, all right, I guess we'll throw away this 15-year friendship that we've had over the fact that I don't want to vote for your mascot. Like,
That's I love that, like calling presidential candidates mascots. That's so kind of accurate and very interesting. Well, I want to thank you, Krish. Your show is smart, funny, interesting, engaging. It's everything that a good virtual Fringe show in 2020 should be. And I can't uh, speak highly enough about the Citizen Revolution. It is a great show. Do you have any websites or social media you'd like to plug before we wrap
yeah.
up?
Thank you so much for saying all those kind things about the show. I really appreciate that. My website is krishmohanhaha.com. It's KRISHMOHANHAHA.com. And that's also the handle to all of my social media at Krish Mohan Haha on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And then I'm on like a bunch of other alternative social media platforms like minds.com and Rockfin, which is they're a crypto blockchain like content creation site, but they also don't have ads, and their primary goal is to not censor creators and to get them paid. So it's kind of like the Netflix for content creators, especially if you're into like political commentary and wrestling and MMA content. Those are the the three big things, which seems so random, but yeah, rockfin.com/krishmohanhaha also.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you to everyone for watching today with the Meet the Maker series. If you haven't seen Chris's show yet, it's only $5 to see up until October 4th. So please see it. If you want to see all the shows at the festival, it's only $50 to see every single show. So consider that as well. All that money goes back to the show creators, which is such a great thing. Also, if you're in Elgin, come out to the gallery on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, and you can check out the art, the fine art that was created for the festival as well. But I just want to thank all of you for watching. I want to thank Krish one more time, and I will see you guys tomorrow at noon with artist Jane Erlinson. Thank you so much.
Thank you.